We're here. We're back.
We're present, and we were just
Yes.
going back and forth about a bunch of different topics and
Yeah.
how we kind of make this happen about this
Yeah.
episode specifically. I think that there's
Yeah.
a lot going on right now in our country that needs our attention.
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
I mean, I think there are a lot of just trending topics that are big that I know people will want us to discuss. But one of the biggest right now is diversity and inclusion. What's
Yep.
happening in businesses, and not just from a corporate perspective, but just what does diversity inclusion mean? Because it's not new. It's been talked about for many years, but it's been talked about a lot now. So
Why
we
is
need to
that?
talk about why.
Well, yeah, why is that? Why is it such a hot topic now?
You know, for one, the protests,
Yep.
the injustice, how loud it's become. Loud meaning not just black people talking about it, white people talking about it, other races talking about it, businesses being propelled to do something.
It's been
to say
thrown
something.
in your face to the point where you can't do anything. You either support it,
You gotta do
or
something. You
if
gotta respond.
if you're some people, you act like it. You act like it's a facade.
It either becomes very silent or very loud. Loud as in a business responding, to their employees, to responding by putting out, press about it, or dead silence, which becomes very obvious. So everybody's saying something about it. Everybody's doing something about it. Even the people that are ignoring it are doing something about it.
I've struggled with thinking about or figuring out what does this mean for our country in the future, because race relations and civic engagement are two things that companies you can't run away from it now.
Right.
You can't stay silent.
Yep.
You have to address it, and everyone wants to know what side are you on on the issue.
Right.
You cannot run away from it, no matter how big or small your company is.
Yep.
And so, when I think about, the global economy, there's so many countries that are, that are able to suppress, the voices of their people, but that's not the case here.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
and
this is a democracy, it's a democracy.
I mean, we call a lot democracy,
yeah,
but
which means that people have the right to vote. They have the right to speak. They have freedom of speech. Now, we know that means different things, around the neighborhood and around, the country itself, but that's what a democracy means. So just by that makes it so that businesses, people, organizations have to respond and do something. You can't just ignore some of these big issues that are happening.
And they're ever present now more than they ever have been.
Yeah.
And so corporations need to do something.
Yeah.
And they have to do something. And so, when we think about diversity and inclusion and the way it's been a movement for, the past 10 years now.
Long time.
Right? But it's different. It looks different.
Yeah.
When we talk about why we came with the topic of color scheme, because business looks different in a bunch of different colors.
Yep.
Right? And when we look at diversity and inclusion, it's the same.
Yep.
Right? Because at one point in time, the civil rights movement was a black movement, right? And then you begin to have so many other movements that kind of have encompassed that the civil rights movement now encompasses.
Yep.
When we look at diversity and inclusion, it's not just a black thing.
No,
right? It's a women's thing.
It's
It's a LGBTQ
Right.
Rights thing. But when we talk about black people specifically, and the way that looks in corporations, companies just still aren't getting it right.
No, they're not. And I think the thing of the past when it came to diversity and inclusion was hire a chief diversity officer, make sure they're black, make sure they have some training, and get them to come in, give them a budget, give them some tasking, and tell them that they need to help us do something organizationally to restructure the diversity problems and what they mean. They haven't identified exactly what the problems are, but they hire a head of diversity to fix them and to figure out what those things are.
But so how does a firm that's predominantly white leadership, white male leadership, board or other, right, executive level, whichever, how do you identify a problem? Like you just said,
Right.
they haven't identified the problems yet. Right, but they just say, I'm going to hire a chief diversity officer as their solution to
Right.
the problems. But if they don't know any better, how do you identify the problem? Yeah.
I think you start looking at your programming. What systems have you had in place to date? So if you are a white male dominated company that wants to do something about diversity and understands that diversity means hiring people and bringing people in that are from all different walks of life, bringing in minorities too, bringing in people from different disciplines, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and all of that. If you understand that that's what it means, then you look around and you see what systems you have in place that have prevented that from happening. That's where you start.
I want us to jump into what we've been doing at Win, which is a firm you launched a couple months ago, right?
Yeah.
To do consulting, and then specifically a lot of work also around diversity and inclusion.
Right.
And because of your background in cyber, taking that aspect of risk assessments and now being able to apply it to how organizations look at their diversity issues and their inclusivity. We've been doing risk assessments for firms. And so explain a little bit more about what we've been doing.
So let me talk about the cyber perspective on risk assessments and what that actually means. When an organization,
and then how do we apply that to?
Absolutely. So if an organization has a number of weaknesses, known or unknown, one of the things that they want to understand is how vulnerable they are across their infrastructure, how vulnerable they are across their computing systems and environments. So that includes people, processes, and technology. Yep. So assessing all of those to determine where your sources of weaknesses are. And then prioritizing those, understanding where you need to focus your attention on first, and attacking that problem. So I look at organizational assessments that very same way, understanding where people are within an organization that may have duplicative roles, duplicative duties, where you might need different funding and resources, where your weaker programs are, where your strengths are in your organization, and assessing that to understand how to make yourself a stronger positioned company. The same is true when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely.
So if you are an organization that wants to understand, one, where's the source of your problem, you assess your organization based on benchmarks, based on best practices, based on
like
what
any
you
other,
are,
like you would do with anything else.
Yep.
And it's so unfortunate that companies don't know that. They don't know that they should be assessing their inclusivity issues.
Yeah.
And
so what they're doing right now, which is, I think a lot of companies are just reactive. Yep. We need to do something. So how many black people do we have on staff? How many black leaders do we have? They're starting to look at their numbers and they're focusing on people, how many people, how many leadership jobs, things like that. You got to dig deeper. What are your retention rates? What do they actually look like? How do you actually not just retain talent, but how do you attract talent? Where do you go to attract talent? How are your hiring processes being articulated in a way that gives people a sense of, that I can apply for that job and actually, have an interview and actually get it. Dig deeper into your human capital processes, understanding what they look like from hiring all the way to when people decide to leave, whether it be for retirement or for other jobs. Look at those percentages across the board. And a lot of organizations have leadership programs in place. So they have true management, career-facing leadership programs that they have in place. Look at the strategies that you have and how you've actually helped support people moving from one level to the next, help support people moving from one position to the next. You have to look at your end-to-end approach and how you hire people, what happens while they're there, and what happens when they leave, from the end-to-end strategy through your human capital. So that's one way to attack it. But what I know organizations are doing right now, because I'm watching the news, I'm reading the papers, organizations are just completely reacting to how many black people do they have on staff. And
that's like the go-to.
That's the go-to.
That
how many
is
black
the
people
go-to.
do I have? And it's not, I'm not trying to just kind of diss or say that the hiring a chief diversity officer that's black is bad. What I think that shows though is you're asking a black person to come in to lead a part of the organization, to uncover the problems of the organizations that they didn't create. It's like having an environment where you have a population of black people, but you're policing it completely by white officers. Now, I'm not saying that just the race, the race itself is going to be, sort of mismatched, but you have to look a little deeper. Yeah. You're asking someone to come in and fix a problem that they have been impacted by. So maybe what you need is the expertise of that person or that the expertise of a company like Win to come in and say, this is how you dissect and attack your problem. But the face of the organization needs to be the leader of the organization. So if the CEO is an older white man and he's been supporting some of the programming that has been in place for many years, maybe he and his colleagues, his peers, his leaders, his staff need to kind of reshape how they've been perpetuating that problem. Don't just bring in a black face to say, oh, now we get it. We hired somebody black and they're the one leader that we have on our website, so we've done something. That's not the right approach.
And another problem with that entire approach of hiring a black person to be the chief diversity officer or to be, the HR director, it's as if you're trying to give a black person a seat at the table for a position that a white person should be in, right? Like
and a problem that's so deep rooted that that black person historically has not created.
Yeah. Exactly. And to be completely frank, if your organization's run by all white people, white males, white women, what have you, and then all of a sudden I think I got something on my lip, and then all of a sudden you hire this black person there to be at the table, doesn't all of a sudden mean now all of a sudden you're going to listen to them or they have the autonomy and the power to make real change.
And so the systems that you've had in place, they will likely, I'm not going to say always, but they will likely be impacted by those too. Because one, if you haven't had someone in that position before to really assess the problem, to really put programming in place to make it better, that's new budget money. Do they have a budget now? And it's likely that their budget was some, kind of side money.
And we've seen that. I mean, I've read so many forums and I've talked to so many, black speakers, black influencers that have been brought in to do a panel on diversity and inclusion, or have been brought in for
minimal
a special
cash, money,
event, in a Fortune 500 corporation, and the budget for diversity and inclusion or for black programming is super small compared to what they would do for a traditional conference or a traditional panel.
Then they have to fight every year to get an increase on that cash flow, on that funding mechanism. So you've already started them here. When your other leaders are here with how much money they've already had for their program,
you put them at the bottom of the hill.
They have to do this every
and they have a bag full of the systems you already have climbing up the hill.
That's the visual.
And they don't get it. And no one gets it. No one gets it.
That is the visual. That is exactly what it is. So how powerful would it be to start from the top to have that CEO say no more? Like, I recognize that we have been going about this all wrong. We have a lot of work that we need to do. We're going to acquire this firm, or we're going to make sure we have leadership in place to do this. But actually explaining that out. This is the path. We messed up. Like, we didn't know that we were as flawed as we are. Now we're going to take some steps to get better, and we're going to inform our stakeholders, our employees along the way on all the things that we're going to do to get better. So I think that, oftentimes what I see in these corporations is they hire the chief diversity officer and they say, go make this better. But they're not actually taking a stance and making a position to say, we are not going to tolerate this anymore. The employees need to hear from them. They need to hear from the leader, that leader that's been in place all that time, and say, you know what? I need to think differently, and I need to run this organization differently, because a lot of what you need to do from an organizational assessment perspective on diversity is figure out where those biases are, figure out where they are. You need to understand and uncover those systems that you have in place. What better way to do that than to start from the top and say, we're gonna start uncovering this stuff and get it right. Like, we're gonna go through a path.
And one of the most disturbing components of that is, you have these white leaders sitting at the helm of their organizations struggling to do exactly what you just said because they're sinking in their privilege. They don't have to. And they haven't had to. And now their way of life is disrupted because of how loud, racial, and I use the word loud because I'm saying it in the context of media coverage, protests, just people being vocal about it. You can't run from it, just like you said at the beginning. You can't run from it. So now they're like, okay, and I got to do
something.
It's discomforting for them, but what they fail to realize is black people have been discomforted our entire lives. Every
Forever.
single step of us trying to get a job, get an internship, climb the ladder, speak to a supervisor,
Yep.
converse with coworkers about these issues, we actually have to suppress them.
Yep.
We have to throw them to the
Yep.
side. We have to act like they don't exist so that we don't make white people feel uncomfortable with
Yep.
us in the office.
And so we don't feel like we're being penalized
Yeah.
in some way, whether it be performance or career progression. I think a lot of times black people are silent because they are afraid of what the outcome will be of saying something. So especially when they're the minority in the company, who do they talk to? Who's going to listen? I think historically it's been, if I say something, it's just me saying something, because they've had, and I think the image has been that their peer group, who oftentimes might be white, are not going to care. So what I think,
Or they don't get it,
or
and because
either
they don't
care
get
or
it,
don't get it,
because they don't get it,
and
it can
sometimes
shoot to the
not
side.
getting it appears to be not caring.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that's largely different now, and I think historically, this fight hasn't just been black people's fight. There have been a number of white people, male and female, that I know have been in the fight too. But now, when you look outside and you look at the protests are not just a sea of black people. There are plenty of white people that are speaking up too, and speaking up organizationally. So I think one of the things that's making these leaders uncomfortable in these corporations is they can't just, honestly, frankly, in the past, I think it's been, okay, I know that's a problem for black people, but, my majority of people, they aren't black. I can still keep my business running. I can still go forward. But they're hearing it from their white employees. They're hearing it from their white managers. They're not just hearing it from black people anymore. It's not just black people that are, quietly uncomfortable. White people are very uncomfortable about it too. So organizations, I think, are looking at it a little differently now. Like, wait, I can't just ignore the problem that has existed by some of my white staff. Some of my black staff. A lot of my white staff are also uncomfortable too, and saying something about it.
That's so important because, the most compelling argument to any movement is it being led or championed, I should say, instead of led, by an ally that isn't directly impacted by it.
Right.
And that's what's needed when we look
That
at
matters. There's so
race
much strength in that.
relations and diversity and inclusion in corporations in general in America, right? Because what's missing is honestly for white people to help racism and help dismantle it. It takes them losing a piece of their own privilege.
Right.
Right, like, which
Yeah.
is uncomfortable. That's like me saying, okay, I have this really nice apartment. In order for me to ensure that a few other people can live in a nice apartment too, I actually have to give this nice apartment up and get a lower quality one so someone else can live in this one. Right, and that's like because it's been unfair for them for so long, and that makes you question. That would make any human or any person question.
Yep.
Right or wrong, but when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and I've experienced this as well, sitting on different councils for different initiatives or different organizations or institutions that or governing bodies that are trying to do more. And what you realize is, even though problems are there in one's face, if you don't do the groundwork to actually learn why that problem persists, it being in your face isn't enough. And that's another issue that we're seeing in corporations and in corporate leadership. We're seeing executives, see the problems that are in front of them with, diversity and inclusion and the lack of integration of minorities and people of color.
Yep.
But because they aren't impacted by it, just because they see it or they hear it, doesn't mean that they'll get it. Doesn't mean they'll know how to respond to it. Doesn't mean that they'll, begin to create systems and hiring practices to then, respond to it in an effective way. Instead, what they do is, what can I do to appease everyone? What can I do to shut everyone up, essentially?
Yep.
And they don't take the time to actually learn about it on their own.
Yep, I think that's been the way.
Or another major issue I've seen is So there's so many social movements, going on that we kind of just mesh them all together.
Right.
And it's not the same. Meshing all these social movements together isn't the same for creating black equality for
Right.
black people, especially in the workplace. Our country has not even decades, I was about to say decades, but centuries, of historical trauma of
Yep.
disenfranchising black people. Like, that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think that, when we think about the corporate structure and look at, kind of if you look at the leadership and kind of go down leadership level, management level, and the worker level, and you look at how prominent the worker level, when there are organizations that do have black people and have minorities, a lot of times you see them at the lower level or that middle tier. And, as a black person who's worked in a number of corporations, it's difficult to try to navigate and figure out how do you get to that next level. And you see programs being created for your white counterparts or you see jobs being created for your white counterparts and your white peers. And when you do speak up and say something, I think sometimes when you think about that trauma, that generational trauma, it's like, why can't you figure it out? Well, I can't. I'm trying to figure it out, but you get a hand. You get a hand that helps pull you up and move you to the next level. And I have to try to figure it out. I have to try to figure out how to navigate this by myself and overcome these biases that are in place and these systems that were not designed for me to be successful. So black people oftentimes are in these organizations struggling and trying to figure out how to get to the next step and get to the next level.
And so I want to take it a little bit deeper, because one of the things that I realized with a lot of podcasts, but we're not going to do this at Color Scheme, a lot of podcasts don't get into the weeds in that because they want to be a little more politically correct, right? And again, going back to that comment you just made about white people having a hand that can pull them up versus black people
Right.
not having the same, very often white people may say that slavery was centuries ago, so
Right.
it's not relevant now,
So
or
we shouldn't be
relevant to
having
them.
issues, right.
There shouldn't be
Right.
issues, right? But when we look at the historical timeline of America, black people were enslaved for a couple of centuries, right?
Yeah.
About two and a half
Yep.
centuries,
Yep.
right? We were freed in the 1800s, and then after we were freed in the 1800s, we already had no education,
Yeah.
we had no property, no money, no one,
Nothing in place.
nothing, and no help.
In place.
And no help. And so
Yeah.
it was like, here you go. Okay, you want
You're
freedom?
free.
Here you go.
Right.
Oh, we don't know anything. Okay, come back and work for us for
Right.
pennies
Right.
on the dollar, right?
Yep.
And then when we look towards the 1900s, 20th century, we then see that black people didn't get a right to vote until the 50s. We didn't get our schools were segregated.
Yep.
So we have not had help for
Yep.
3.5 centuries.
Yep.
And when we look at our country, everyone's happy because we have a couple of black CEOs, because we got a couple of people black people that own VC firms
Right.
and television stations, and we have all these black celebrities because we've idolized hip hop,
Yep.
right? But
Yep.
when we look at the grand scheme of things, black people, we really haven't been free more than all of 30 years.
Right.
All of
Right.
30 years, we really want to talk about us
Yeah.
as a people having freedoms, having rights, having the opportunity to be educated, having the opportunity to
Having freedoms that equate to equality.
exactly.
Yeah.
Versus white people in our country having those freedoms since the founding fathers
Right.
stepped foot on this country.
Right.
Right? And when we look at why black people don't have as much help in the workplace, well, for generations, a lot of black
Right.
parents haven't had skilled or career
Yeah.
jobs.
Yep.
To
So
teach
a
us
lot
those
of times
things.
it's this, like even for me, I'm the first in my generation to get to the executive ranks in the government and to get to a place of
And your family?
yeah, in my family,
Yeah.
to get to a place of senior leadership. I remember my
I have a friend.
aunt-
I have a friend that's moving moving out of his place the other day. He was like, literally said to me like a week or so ago, it was like, it's not fair. COVID has positioned everyone in the world where you have all of these white all of these white young professionals, my white friends, they all can go home and live with their families, live with their parents. I got nowhere to go. Like I still got to figure out how to pay my rent, to pay my bills. I got nobody at home or a family I can go to. Like I'm just trying to figure it out. There's nowhere for me to go to live where you got all of these younger white folks that can go home to their parents' house, regardless of whether they're in college, their 20s, or their 30s. I know a couple people in their 30s that are still going home, and like, this is quarantine is stupid. Why would I live by myself in this random city? I might as well go home to my family's house in the suburbs somewhere and be cool and work from there. And they're stacking up money, right? And that's how they build residual wealth.
Yep.
But when we look at black people, that's not the same. And, so many people, ask questions about why that's not the case. Only really 30 years of real freedom. Only about 30 years. And even in these past 30 years, we're still seeing the effects of generational trauma. And
so one of the things about just that truth, when we talk about diversity and inclusion programs and doing those organizational assessments to kind of uncover where bias is, one of the things that they must do, they must know, are things like that. How can you think that black people can be on the same, an even playing field when there hasn't been a complete picture of equality for black people? I mean, it still isn't. It still isn't. Hasn't been, but it's been set up in pieces. The right to vote. To have all these different rights and systems that have been that we've had to fight for, just like you said, in the past several years. Actually uncovering that, actually putting that very vividly in someone's face in an organization so that they understand that the person to your right has had these things set up, not for their success, for them to fail, for them to not achieve, for them to stay in a state where you look at them like they're an underachiever. But this is what the system looks like. It looks like what you just said. So actually having those things in place and having those, like, that's where you get the gritty raw. Like, that's where you really put it in these organizations' faces, where they can actually see, this is what it looks like. It looks just like this. So if you don't uncover that, if you don't say it that way, if you don't put it in their faces in that way, then they're going to keep saying, well, I don't know, you have the same opportunity I have. Like, we're the same job.
And too
like,
often,
what's your problem?
and too often when people think about opportunity, we just think about, oh, can you get a job? Yes or no? Can you get...
Not just that. Can you apply? Well, you can apply.
Yeah.
It's on the website. You can do the same thing I can do.
Yeah.
It is not that simple. It is not that simple. And it damn sure isn't an excuse. It's the reality. It's really what's happening. And so I think a part of diversity and really thinking through what inclusion looks like, you have to peel back those layers. You have to shine a light on things like that so that people that don't look like us understand this is what the journey looks like. This is why, you have to, if you want to change the culture and you want to change what diversity and inclusion looks like in your company, you have to set up systems and programs to help people actually be on an even playing field, because it's just not true that it's that way today. It's not.
But it also comes back down to, you can want to have these things change in your organization, and it may look sexy to be a part of this movement, or to throw your brand on one of these movements. But like anything else, it takes work.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work.
And
commitment.
And it's unfortunate because a lot of companies don't want to put in the work.
No, they don't. They don't. But like I said, these companies, either, most of them have, I don't know too many companies that absolutely don't, especially large corporations that absolutely don't have any black people. Black people are a little over 13% of the population. We're talking about over 40 million people. 40 million people. I mean, we're still, that's still a small snip in the bucket when you think about, how prominent white people are in this country. But you're going to ignore 40 million people. 40 million people, that's a lot of people to continue to think you just can't do anything about, who are, more college educated than ever before. I mean, we have young people that have. I mean, we talk about all the hurdles that have been in place for Black people. We have more Black people graduating high school. We have more Black people that are college educated. We have more Black people in professional careers than ever before. We have more Black people in entrepreneur businesses and startups than ever before. So we have Black people are pushing. They are pushing and they are moving to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. So because of that, like, you can't just ignore 40 million people in this country that are pushing all those boulders that I just mentioned to be seen and to be heard. It's just not possible to continue to do that.
But I would say, it's unfortunate because it is possible. Right
It's
now.
not possible for them all.
Not for all the corporations.
That's what I'm saying. It's not possible for them all.
When we've often on our show have had the conversation about leadership, and when we've talked about leadership, we've talked about America as a whole. We've talked a lot about our government and our systems and our structures, and very often corporations follow the lead of the leadership that's in our federal government.
Yeah.
And when we come down to systems that are created that either perpetuate these issues or don't help them, when we see Black people get ahead, things happen or systems are reestablished to hold us back. A prime example is back in 2012 and that presidential election. The rate of voter turnout by Black people was more than the rate of voter turnout than white people. And President Obama won again.
Yeah.
And then what did we see? The following year, the Supreme Court ruled in the Shelby County versus Holder case, where they rescinded a major law, that ended up suppressing our votes. That gave southern states, that originally hindered southern states from making special rules in the voter process without DOJ's approval. Yeah. And then after they rescinded that, we started seeing, a bunch of southern states taking out mailboxes and doing all these things that affected the midterm elections and so, yeah, it's one thing where Black people are making progress, but it's a whole nother thing when, systems in our country and the way our country was constructed as a whole is meant to hold Black people back.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of successful white individuals who haven't had to relate or empathize with black people, when they see a Black person that is successful in a room that's typically a white male room or all white dominated room, they look at that person as an anomaly.
Yeah.
And in that case,
me.
That's you.
That's what happens to me.
And in that
that's
case,
what happens to me.
That's not true. It's not. It's like, no, I'm not. Yeah. Yes, I am sharp. Yes, I am exceptional. Yes, I am amazing. But I'm not the only Black person that's exceptional, smart, and amazing.
Yep.
And that's an unfortunate reality we have to deal with.
That is absolutely what happens to me. I mean, it's happened to me so much in my career. It still happens to me now. It's like I'm the exception. But, one of the things that I personally even struggle with is, as I'm climbing, I don't see anybody else that looks like me. I don't see anybody else that looks like me. So I'm always trying to, I'm in a position where I'm here and I'm still trying to move up and I'm still trying to keep, grabbing my piece of the pie, and I'm still working hard. And then I'm trying to help somebody else at the same time that I'm trying to move. I'm like this, like climbing a ladder. And then I have somebody, that I'm trying to help pull up too, but there aren't any places of assistance this way or this way. It's me trying to help the next person in the same position that I'm in, or so that we can kind of be side by side and work on this together and work up, up this ladder together. But there isn't anything in place to help. I can't refer that person to somebody else or refer that person to this program or this place of assistance, because I know how difficult it was for me to even, climb through it and struggle through it, because there was no help. There was me trying to be that help for myself. So, it's not even just that it's hard to do it. It's you're trying to help somebody else when you're trying to change the system. It's not just the struggle of, wow, I'm trying to climb and I want to get to the next level, and I'm trying to make time for you too. It's at the same time that you're doing that, you're trying to break barriers and move the systems that are in place, so that equality is not just for him or her that you're trying to help. It's for everybody that looks like us. And these companies they're not seeing that. They're not seeing that quickly enough. And I'm hoping that from at least all of the press and all the media attention on what diversity and inclusion should be, that some of these companies, like you said, there's a lot of follow the leader happening. I'm hoping that more of these companies that are really prominent in this country start moving, because it needs to be disruptive. We have to disrupt these systems to make some change happen. It's been too slow progress.
And on the note of disruption, it needs to be like a very comprehensive approach. It needs to be holistic.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it isn't just, oh, it's an HR problem, or, oh, it's a culture problem, or, oh, we need to educate people. Like, it's a multifaceted.
It is.
There needs to be a multifaceted approach. Yeah, exactly, to dismantling. And I mean, I don't know many people other than you that actually knows how to do this.
Yeah. I think that there are some, I don't have any examples of any firms off the top of my head, but I know that there are businesses that have really been trying to figure this out. They've really been trying to figure out the best way to help organizations get this right, and get this right meaning it's not just, flavor of the month. We're just going to pay attention to it right now. I know companies are working to try to help organizations bake this in to their culture, like bake this in as a new way of doing business. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but that strategy needs to be in place. The first thing you have to do is you have to assess the problem. You have to really, there's no way that these leaders just know what the problem is, because if they did, we wouldn't be here, right? Yeah. We wouldn't be in this state. So they have to take the time to do a deep assessment of the issue, of the systems that are in place, of how it's causing impediments for people, causing, companies to be stagnant, and actually positioning themselves for a more inclusive culture.
I would say a big part of that is having very uncomfortable conversations with employees and staff.
Absolutely.
How does one of these corporations actually get their staff members to open up?
Well, it's just like I said, like with it's like when I talk about doing a cyber risk assessment, one of the ways that you assess anything within an organization is you have to interview people and talk to people. Yeah. And a lot of times I think that because I've done independent assessments, I feel like it's always easier. Well, not just I feel like it, I know it's always easier for employees to talk to someone who's not of the company. That's why I say hiring a black chief diversity officer is just not going to do it. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's not an approach. Hey, maybe with some more strategy, funding, and other things around that could work. But that's not the way that I think you do that initially. But coming into an organization as an independent party that is skilled, is qualified, can attest to what I've done in the past, I can get people to talk. I always do, because it's like I'm not a part of this organization. I'm going to use your information individually, but as part of the masses, and helping people understand how their information is going to be used, helping people understand that they are, have some anonymity in how they're, providing input. That helps people to talk. Having your manager or your leader that you know has perpetuated this problem. Now, like I said, I don't want to backtrack on my comments a couple of minutes ago when I said, yeah, the leaders need to be present and say, we're not going to continue to do things this way. That needs to happen. But they don't need to be the ones in the room saying, come in, I have an open door policy. Come and talk to me about race relations. Tell me about your problems. Really? No, absolutely. That can't be the approach. They're having an independent party coming in there that has been hired to do good, to be helpful. Having that leader commit to making sure that the staff understand that your role is to do good for the organization. You got to make people understand that and feel that and buy into that. They will talk to you. They will talk to an independent party and talk about, what life has been like for them in these jobs. It is important in this world of diversity and inclusion. You have to give people a forum to talk. You cannot just go into the organization, assess it, and not interview people and talk to people at all different levels and find out what their experiences have been. Don't just go talk to all the black people. You need to talk to everybody. What have their experiences been? Where do they think the strengths and weaknesses are in the organization? What would they like to see change? They give them the forum to do that, and that in addition to the policies and processes that they've had in place and some of the things that they've instilled in that culture for some time, you couple all those things together, you're going to have a whole assessment party. Yeah. You're going to be able to understand where the problems are in that organization and really figure out steps to help that organization do better. And the thing is, when I talk about an assessment, I'm talking about you putting together that detailed framework that helps, tease out all those issues, but establishing a clear plan that leadership can commit to, that people understand. You show people that you are preparing a path for things to be better, that you're baking into the culture, and that you're making this huge organizational shift.
It's like any other component of strategic planning. Right, like
you don't just put the plan together and say we have a strategic plan, and we post it on the website and go read it and know about it.
You collaborate, you do breakout groups, you have team meetings, you get people's thoughts, people's inputs, you see what's working, what's not working. You think about how you all have worked with other contractors, other vendors, other organizations.
And that's how you set up the training that they need. So when you talked about race relations and where we've been, black people have been in this country, like, I guarantee it's part of understanding where people have been within an organizational structure and how they view race relations and the challenges that they've had and all that. You will uncover that need for training like that. And that's not even training, that's more awareness. Let me tell you what this looks like and actually give them that form and help them understand what that looks like, for black people and for other people that have been impacted about of all these racial inequalities. And show them that and start, defining what that training looks like and what that path looks like to, shifting that, that it's like making that big, huge cruise ship make a turn. You know how hard that is. It takes a minute. You gotta turn the wheel.
Been into the?
I've been on a cruise. But anyway,
what's the captain of the captain? I know on the plane it's the cockpit. Not the cockpit.
I can't think of the cockpit. Yeah, I've been in it. I mean, I've been on several boats.
It's not like a.
No, it takes a little while. Like when you have a huge ship, like a small ship.
Like a Metro bus wheel.
Yeah.
Or is it like
if you think about that huge Metro bus
ones.
wheel and how it takes, I
don't think I've ever seen a cruise ship do a U-turn.
You have to turn. It takes a little bit to turn it. You didn't watch the Titanic?
So that's the same amount of, no, I've never seen the Titanic actually. Well, so that's the same amount of effort that needs to be put into steering your ship.
Yeah, you're not going to just turn it really quickly. It's going to take a little while to make that full throttle turn, but showing people what that looks like, I think that's the real piece of shifting this thinking around diversity and inclusion and actually having a more inclusive culture. It starts with assessing where your weaknesses are and finding out where the problem points are and making those changes and being committed to making those changes. It's important to do it.
So. One of the challenges, I would say corporations have is changing human behavior, right? Because a lot of it is driven by human behavior. Right. And so, I mean, there are a lot of psychological components to why racism persists, why people act the way they do in the office,
Yeah.
and why, and how we've gotten to a place where there's so many, how we all have our own internal biases
Right.
and stereotypes. And so, it's even deeper than the assessments for me.
Yeah, well, I want to say, I just need to say this because I think people think that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, especially in being diverse, I think organizations might think they're going to have a goal of, I'm going to fix people so they're not racist anymore. You're not going to fix people so they're not racist anymore. You might be able to change people's perceptions. You might be able to change, you might be able to uncover bias in a number of different ways. There are some people that are racist, have been racist, generational, it's just been there, passed down in their families. The goal is not to fix every perspective on racism. I know that's what people, in people's minds are like, I'm going to stop people from being racist.
No more racist.
Here's the thing. As a leader, as someone who leads organizations, your job is to make people accountable for their behavior, for getting work done, for accomplishing the mission. That is your job. Your job is to move that organization towards whatever your bottom line is so that everybody invests in that mission and gets things done, right? So in order to do that, you can't make people nice. You can't make people good. You can't make people stop being racist. What you can do is you can hold them accountable for their behavior. Hold them accountable for their behavior. So if they have been perpetuating, unfair hiring practices, if they've been holding people back from performance bonuses and things like that, you uncover that and you hold them accountable for it and you tie that to their performance like you do anything else, you will see some behavioral changes. Your job is not to get in people's heads and their minds and make them different. You want to give them the information so you can lead them into being different, but you don't know if you can't. You're not going to have a metric that says how many people. Let's see. I think I have 100% of people that are racist that are white. So by the end of the year, I want that to be down 50%. Yeah, that is not realistic. You're not going to be able to do that. That's not your goal. Don't be crazy. That you can't focus that way. What you have to do is you have to give people the information that they need. You have to uncover, when I talk about those assessments, you uncover what the problems are. You hold people accountable for making decisions that are as objective as possible based on the information that you give them, based on the information you give them, based on the tools that you give them, based on your leadership commitment.
But I mean, even like on councils that I've sat on that want to create more racial equity, or leaders of different firms and partners of different firms that have come to me asking me about their responses to some of the social issues that are going on, or even people paying me to help them come up with some of these systems changes. What I found is people still, even if in the back of their minds it's like, I want to fix this issue or this issue needs to be changed, it's still very difficult to get people to see the problem, to see how the problem is there, because it's so easy for leaders to come up with excuses, right? Like we've heard recently, someone say, a CEO say that there's not enough black talent. I've heard another partner at another firm, in the meeting I've been in, say, well, black people, in terms of serving as a like a mentor or a coach for like an entrepreneurship program, black leaders don't have enough time, or don't have as much time, and things like that, right? So those unconscious biases that are in place still persist, even if the leaders does acknowledge that the problem is there or hire someone to come fix the problem. Like
data. They need the data. They need the facts. They need the stats. They need to see the data. So a lot of the CEOs that you're talking about and the leaders that you're talking about, they're just saying stuff. They're just saying stuff based on their own perceptions, sometimes based on their own biases, sometimes based on a lack of information. They need the data. They need to actually see. So my response to that is, here's where you're wrong.
Here you go.
I'm not saying that they won't still try to excuse it away, but if you're saying that there's no black talent, how did I get where I am? I am not the only one. I'm special, yeah, to me, but I am not the only one. So when black people are making it and black people are achieving, it's yeah, we're special, we're wonderful, we're great, but it's not that person is the only person that can do that. It's impossible to think that only one person can do a certain thing when it comes to being able to achieve in business. We see it all the time. We see products go to market. We see new things created, and then someone taking that and refining it and making it better, and then it goes to market. It happens. That's what evolution is. That's what life really looks like. So every CEO and every leader that makes statements like that, they need the data. And I promise you, immediately after some of those remarks are made, especially when they hit the news, what do you think happens after that? They get the data. Someone says, shouldn't have said that. Here's some facts and figures for you. I mean, that's what happens. That's why they end up apologizing. That's why they end up retracting some of their statements. And that's why they end up saying, I didn't have enough information, or based on what I saw. Based on what you saw doesn't mean that that's the reality. So they need the data. The data will show where there's black talent. The data will show. How about all the people internal to some of those companies that have been wanting to get ahead? If you understand what your systems are in place, you might figure out why some of the talent that you have inside your organization hasn't been able to achieve and hasn't been able to be in those. Exactly. So they need the data, they need the information, and I think when we think about the conversations that are happening in boards, in the CEO and C-suite level boards, where you have the CFO and the CIO and heads of HR and all these different divisional and organizational leads, when they're talking about their board, when they're having their board discussions, they're not always talking about diversity at all.
Not at all.
I'm saying they're not always. Some companies might, touch on it because they have the chief diversity officer. Some of the companies that have, that person, they might be bringing up diversity issues. But the companies that don't have or haven't included, diversity and inclusion as part of their culture and how they work, they're not even talking about it at the C-suite level at all. So if they're not talking about it, when are they getting the data? They're not getting the data.
Yeah, and that's disturbing, right? Because if you're not talking about the C-suite level, how does any one of your staff members have the confidence to come speak to you about it or to address it?
People know that when people know that you're not talking about it, they translate that to you don't care, or you don't want to hear it, or you're not concerned with that problem. So they suppress it and they don't talk about it at all, and then they continue to struggle to try to figure out how to get to the next level. So that's why a lot of times when people come to me, especially people of color, black people, come to me and they talk about, the challenges they've had within a particular organization and getting ahead and moving up the corporate structure. Once I understand the corporate structure for that company, I'm like,
it's not the place for you. Yeah.
Like I'm not even gonna talk you through breaking barriers. I'm not even gonna talk you through trying to establish new programs. Let's find companies that actually support that and go there. Because, otherwise that's what I did. I mean, I had a time in my career when, I was the only black person at the table with only white men, and I was a decision making just like them. I had staff and I was leading people just like them, and I saw positions being created for each of them to be in the executive pool, and I'm sitting there like, I am working my ass off, I'm doing all kinds of stuff. What about me? Like what? And and then so I started asking those questions like, I don't know, what do I have to do? Like I need somebody to kind of help me with this path. And they were like, you're not even at the same level as us. What do you mean? I'm in the same grade level as you. You thought I was, what did you think I was doing here? You thought I was just kind of showing up. I've always been at the same level as you. We've always been, it's like the thing that I realized is when it matters, that's when you're not equal. When it comes time for you to show up and get the job done and get the work done, then maybe you can sit at the table. But when you're actually talking about equality in pay and in rights and in position, sometimes that's when they're like, no, 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 no. And so when I realized that, I said, you know what, this is not the place for me. I'm going to go someplace else that might be a little bit more inclusive of me and my talents and what I bring to the table. And that's how I've been able to navigate. I recognize what's happening around me. I call it out. I work through it. But then I might realize that at the end of the day, I might be defeated. There's nobody else here pushing this but me. Yeah. So I may have to fight that battle someplace else.
But it's an important battle. So many of us don't realize the doors we're opening for those behind us.
Yeah.
I recently watched a video where Tyler Perry talked about how he had this amazing brunch on his property down in Atlanta, and how John Lewis was there, and he was talking about how he purchased his property, and whoever the segregationist who was there, kept suing him, and I guess John Lewis was a part of the group that was like the first black people in this diner on this property, right? And how they bonded over that. And, Tyler Perry said how amazing it was to be in the same room, and to have a friendship with John Lewis, this guy who, was one of the direct reasons he was able to buy this property so much longer. And, as individuals such as ourselves, walk into rooms and break down barriers and to be quite frank, work our asses off to not only excel, but to show how excellent black people are. We're creating so many doors for not only the people that surround us and our peers and our colleagues, but so many young people that are going to come after us. And so I had a conversation with a C-suite executive the other day at a global investment firm. And, I was just thanking him. He was like, "Oh, you're too nice. You keep giving this old man so many compliments." And I was like, it's important, because there aren't many of you. There aren't not only are there not many black men and women in positions like you that are paving the way and excelling, but there also aren't many of black men and women like you that are also reaching back. Right, to help as well. And so it's always very important for me to provide the affirmations that I feel, our people deserve and have earned, not only with what they're currently doing in their positions, but what they have been doing for the decades that have led up to them being in their positions, from an educational standpoint, from very often, suppressing our voices, on racism and, stereotypes and microaggressions that we deal with on a regular basis. Like it's hard to suppress your voice every single time because it happens so regularly.
Yep.
Right. And all of those barriers that we overcome on a regular basis, it paves the way. And, I've said throughout this entire show that it's been almost 30 years of black people being free. And I would say even less than that when we look at the entire country.
Yep.
And if this is what we've done in 30, 40 years, I see why white people are scared.
Yep. We are amazing and beautifully made. Because really for us to be able to progress and to be in top positions like the gentleman that you mentioned, it's amazing that we've been able to overcome, but there's still so much more to do. There's still so much more that we need to do and accomplish, but we need the support of these organizations to do it.
Yeah.
We absolutely do. That's why it makes me proud to see so many races out there protesting and trying to make a change, and black people just not going about this alone. We need the investments of these CEOs and these leaders to invoke change. We absolutely need it.
It's a collective issue. It really is. And we can't be the ones that are, that have our sledgehammer hitting down that wall alone.
No, we shouldn't be the ones driving the change. We are impacted by it, but we need the support of others to really turn that ship.
Yeah.
We absolutely do. So, yeah, it's important for organizations to get it right. So, I know we're probably wrapping up on our time, but one of the things that I just want to say to any organization that's out there wanting to get this right, invest in an organization that's done it. Invest in people that can help you do it. Don't just throw money at the problem and hire black people and increase your black numbers. It's not that simple. Deal with the problem, tackle the problem. Get somebody in there that's done this before. Get somebody in there with solid credentials that can help you do this and do this right.
Yeah.
And take the time and be thoughtful in it. This is not don't rush this through. This is something that needs time, investment, and money.
So if someone wanted to hire Win to do this and help them win in the framework of diversity and inclusion, where would they find out about?
KMiddleton@thinkwin.org. Email me.
Thinkwin.org is the website.
Thinkwin.org.
Lovely. All right. On that note, we are done. Another episode in the can, talking about Black excellence, talking about diversity and inclusion. This is a great topic. Thank you.
Thanks, babe. This is great. This is great.